Welcome back to BI 300 Biblical Economics. And we continue our conversation about the importance of understanding this subject because it impacts the entire world, and it definitely impacts the world of the church. So I want to draw your attention again. How people view money is an effective barometer of their spirituality. How they view it, how they look at it, how they think about it, how it dominates their lives, how they submit themselves to it. Absolutely everything about it is an effective barometer of their spirituality. We also said that money is neutral. It is neither good nor bad. And we said that what people do with their money is a reflection of their internal morality. Now, I want to continue this conversation, as I said, because we had a question that came in, and I want to address that question now. And it's going to take me a little bit just to address that question. And that was, the issue was, do you condemn people who are in poverty? And it's a good question. I wasn't offended by the question at all. But it's an excellent question because it's one that's misunderstood. The complications with regard to poverty are vast and multifaceted. However, the solutions are quite simple. That's if we have a spiritual worldview, if we have a biblical worldview, if we have a Christian worldview. Now, if we don't have that worldview, then the solutions become extremely complicated as the problem itself. I stated to you earlier that somebody does not have control as to where they're born, what country they're born in, under what conditions they're born in. You have no control of who your parents are, who your mother is, who your father is, how you were born. You have no control over that. There's about 90% of the issues in life you have no control over, other than what you do have is 100% control of the decisions that you make. That's very critical to understanding this subject matter with regard to biblical economics. However, I was raised in poverty. I was raised in Harlem in New York City. I lived as a child in Mexico. I lived as a child in Puerto Rico, and I lived in Cuba as a child. And I just went from poverty to poverty to poverty to poverty to poverty. Okay? But I don't live in poverty now. I don't pretend to live in poverty. I will not even, and I never want to go back to living in it. Okay? But I did understand a few principles, and those principles was that we make decisions that either keep us inside of poverty or it elevates us outside of poverty. So the question is, do you condemn people given the veracity, given the emotional thrust that you give to responding to this issue? No. I do not condemn people who are in poverty. What I condemn is that you choose to stay there. There is a big difference. There's a big difference. So let's begin to understand this issue, because it doesn't matter where you are in the world. Poverty is the same. It becomes relative to your situation. So I want to let's begin to go back and redefine some issues. If you remember, I had mentioned to you that the distinguished economist, British economist by the name of Lionel Robbins, he gave the classic definition of economics, and this is what he said. He said, economics is the study of the use of scarce resources with alternative uses. Now, we keep repeating that over and over again because it seems to be not understood very well. Absolutely everything is limited in supply in the world, especially in the fallen world. And so we have to compete for the same resources all over the world. Some people are much better at it than others. Some countries are better at it than others. So you may have a smaller country dominating more resources as opposed to a larger country that's dominating less resources. And that's because of the decisions that each government makes. And as a result, it impacts the local people, it impacts the cultures and the traditions of all the various groups that are inside of that country. And then all of those individual groups are fighting and competing for the same resources as well. So scarcity is what we have to deal with it. So what does scarce mean? What does it mean? What does it mean to have scarce resources? It means that what everybody wants adds up to more than there is. What everybody wants is practically the same thing The problem is that more people want the same thing than what is actually available to them. So that's what scarce means. It means that what everybody wants adds up to more than there actually is. So if you understand that, now let's do the flip side of that coin, poverty. So let's look at what is poverty. Poverty is the scarcity or the lack of certain amount of material possessions or money. Scarcity, okay, so poverty is the scarcity or the lack of certain amount of material possessions or money. That's a reality that we have to face. Right? So poverty is the state of somebody who's extremely poor. Somebody who's extremely poor. So what that means is that you have 1,000 families are living you have thousands and thousands and thousands of families who are living in what's called abject poverty. Abject poverty. That is, they're at the lowest end of anybody's scale. Okay, so they find themselves in a state of penury. Okay, penury, and penury is a funny little word there. It means that they're in a state of destitute. Okay, destitution, pauperism. Okay, or you have pauperdom, you have beggary, you have indigence, you have penniless. Okay, impoverishment, you have neediness, hardship, and then you have this funny little word, impecuniousness. Impecuniousness is a funny little word, and I remember when I was in England, and they stated that, and they came out, and it was a newspaper heading, and they said that the level or the state of impecuniousness is growing. And I was traveling with another pastor. He said, well, what is that funny word? And I said, well, that word there it means poverty. That's what it means, literally. Okay? It's an old word that we don't use hardly today, but it all means the same thing. So now, if you understand that, you have to begin to understand the differences to this. Okay? And that is that you have two concepts here. One is absolute poverty. The other one is relative poverty. You have a threshold, a level. Every country, every society, every culture has a level of poverty or a threshold. Once somebody goes below that line, they're now in extreme poverty. So every country is going to be a little bit different. So let's look at this for a moment with me, okay? So poverty is the scarcity or the lack of material possessions, okay, or lack of a certain amount of material possessions or money. So poverty is a multifaceted concept which may include social issues, economic issues, and political elements. That is all true the way we deal with the issue from a human perspective. Now, absolute poverty is extreme poverty, okay? Or destitution that refers to the complete lack of means necessary to meet basic personal needs such as food, clothing, and shelter. That's absolute poverty. And you can see that very clearly all over the world. You can see that. We have absolute poverty here in this country as well, in certain parts of our country. Then, that means that somebody has come to a certain threshold, a certain level. There's a certain level where people fall. Once they fall under that level, they find themselves in absolute poverty. Okay? So absolute poverty is defined and is considered to be about the same, independent of the person's permanent location or area. So it doesn't matter where you are around the world. You can clearly define and see absolute poverty. That's very, very clear. Then, on the other hand, we have something that's called relative poverty. Relative poverty is when you get into comparisons, okay? So it occurs when a person lives in a given country and does not enjoy a certain minimal level of standard living as compared to the rest of the population of that country. So therefore, the threshold of which relative poverty is defined varies from country to country, from one society to another. So, for example, you remember the other day in the class we were talking about this, and we said that in our country here, right now we're in the United States of America at the moment. So what we would consider somebody to be under the poverty line, at the level of poverty, a single individual is somebody who makes approximately $12,000 per year. Now, I realize, of course, that that's a lot of money in many, many other countries around the world. But here in the United States, $12,000 is relatively a little bit amount of money, okay? So that's called relative poverty. So every country has two things, absolute poverty and relative poverty. And you have to be able to distinguish the difference between both of them, because both of these issues, okay, are impacting the life of the church for different reasons, and both find themselves in that situation for different reasons. But it doesn't matter how you get there. The issue is that they both have to get out the same way. So understand the difference between absolute poverty and relative poverty. And I've been to a lot of churches around the world where I see both issues. I see both absolute poverty and I see relative poverty. Now, the truth be known is that for many places that I go to around the world, it's not absolute poverty, it's relative poverty, even though the issue of absolute poverty does exist in many, many churches around the world. So providing basic needs can be restricted by constraints on the government, okay, on the government's ability to deliver services. So you may have a government that has a lot of resources, but because of corruption, they're unable to deliver the services to their people, okay? Because of the taxation process that they have in their country. They're killing businesses. They just tax everything to death. So they're not able to deliver the services, because people, the higher taxes are, the more businesses cut back, because they just cannot, they find themselves in a situation where they're feeding the government, right, with very little return. You have those who avoid paying taxes as well. You have the thing called tax avoidance. So you have a lot of our people avoid paying taxes, so the resources are not available to the government to provide the very services that they want delivered by the government. And then, of course, you have debt, okay? Once the government gets into a lot of debt, and they get into outrageous amounts of debt to other nations around the world and to the World Bank and to the International Monetary Fund and so forth, what happens is that the interest payments are killing them. They begin to pay large amounts of interest, which they can't even pay the loan. So now you're looking at a country that's going to be desperately drowning in debt for the next 50 years. That's a lifetime when you look at that. So you have to understand that, okay? And then you have loan conditions. They may borrow. So you have countries that borrow money from other countries, okay? And so what they do is that each country has its own loan conditions. And so they'll have something like, people coming, like, for example, in many places in Africa, as an example, they may get a huge loan from China, as an example. And then China says, okay, we'll charge you very little interest, which is a great deal, but here's the condition of the loan. We now will operate your diamond mines. So now all of a sudden the loan, because they need cash. So now what happens is that what backs up the collateral to their loans is their natural resources, but now another country controls all their natural resources, and they're really making hundreds of millions of dollars from the diamond mines as compared to what the loan is. So you have to understand this is a multifaceted, very complex issue. But the solution to get out of it, okay, is relatively simple. So now, I want to go back and look at this question about the condemnation of the poor. Listen, nobody should be in the business of condemning the poor. I'm not in the business of condemning the poor. What I am in the business is rebuking people who choose to stay in the poor, who choose to stay poor, who choose to stay in poverty. That's a different issue. Let me share, not too long ago, one of our pastors in the northern part of the continent of Africa sent me a video. It was a short video. I would say probably, I think it's like 3 minutes and 3 seconds or something like that. But let me give you a description of this video, because I think it's an excellent, when I saw the video, I immediately recorded that in my head. The video just stuck in my head immediately, because it was a great example of the point that I want to attempt to make here in this class today. In this video, there's a man, a very elderly man, he's down to basically very little clothing on him. He's got a pair of shorts on. He's somewhere in Asia walking. He's barefooted. And he's walking down the road and cars are passing him by. And he's walking down the road. And you can see the agony and the pain that he is in because he's walking barefooted. And after a while, what he's done is literally he's raising the front part of his feet because he's just in a lot of pain walking barefooted. So at some point he stops. The elderly man stops. And he sits down. And he has a little bag with him. And in the bag he has 2 large plastic bottles, the big, what they call liter bottles, and they're crushed. And he's got some rags. And what he literally does, he puts the 2 bottles on, they're already crushed, so he puts them under his feet. And at the very tip of the opening of the bottle, which he has in the front, he grabs a rag, okay, and then he ties it around his ankle, and he's made 2 slippers. And he gets up and he begins to walk. In the meantime, there's a young man, a young boy. He's a boy. He's in a vehicle waiting for his father to come out of a store somewhere. And so the little boy is looking at this old man, and he rolls his window down, and he sees what the old man is doing. The boy registers that, and the little boy is shocked. You could tell from the vehicle that the boy is sitting in and that the father is driving that he is not in poverty. He's probably in the middle class of his country. He's in the upper middle class of his country, economically speaking. The boy is well dressed. He's groomed. He's sitting there. But you can see the boy is very disturbed by what he sees with this old man. His father comes out, and the little boy gets out. And his father comes out, and the boy jumps back in, gets in the car, and they drive away. Well, the thought continues to play in the young man's head, in the young boy's head. He goes home, and he has a little piggy bank. He has his little plastic cup where he keeps his money. The boy takes the money out of it. He leaves his house, and he goes to a store. And he goes to the store, and he buys a pair of slippers, brand new slippers in the box. And he gets on his bicycle, and he drives around, and he finds the old man finally sitting down near a tree. And so what he does, that he gives the old man the gift. And the old man opens the box, and he is stunned and moved mightily that this young boy purchased him a pair of slippers so he can walk. Just about at this scene, the father is driving down the road and sees his son in a crouched position speaking to the old man. And the father stops his vehicle and comes out, and he's got this stern look on his face. And he comes out, and finally, his boy sees him, and his boy runs to him. And at some point, he melts his father's heart, and his father's proud of what the boy had done. Okay? And the video ends. Now, why do I share that with you? Because it has everything to do with this subject of poverty and being poor, finding yourself in the midst of pauperism, impecunious, in penury, in destitution, and so forth, and all the fancy words that we want to use for this condition. And really, and the video is encouraging for us to help the poor. I believe with all my heart we should help the poor. But here's my problem with the whole video. At the end, is that we left the poor man on the side of the road with a pair of slippers. We left him in the same condition that we found him. The only thing we did was we elevated his footwear. That was it. Which means that this man now stays in the condition of poverty. See, that's our problem. We help the poor by giving them things. We give them food and clothing, a pair of shoes, a pair of slippers, and so forth. We do those. And should we do those things? Of course we should do those things. But we leave them there. We leave them there, and this is what we wind up doing. Remember the question. Brother Eddie, do you condemn poverty? Do you condemn the poor? Remember, that was the question. I was not offended by the question. I thought it was an excellent question because it gave me the opportunity to answer that question in this format that I'm doing right now. And what I condemn, okay, is that we leave people in poverty. We don't show them how to get out of poverty. And so what we wind up doing, and this is what we wind up doing, and I don't know if I can explain this properly or not, I'm going to try to. Our gifts, the things that we do for the poor, okay, actually condemns them to a lifetime of poverty. And we don't even realize we're doing it. In other words, we justify their condition. We justify their condemnation by giving them something and then leaving them there. And now the only way they're going to survive is depending on somebody else coming by and giving them something else. So now you have to spend a lifetime giving these people something, and they live, they procreate, they have children, and they have more children, and they have more people growing and living in a state of poverty, and they don't ever seem to get out of the process. So what does that make us? What it makes us is that we become the masters, and they have become the slaves. And we do this in Jesus' name. And ladies and gentlemen, that is absolutely wrong. That's absolutely wrong what we're doing. Should we help the poor? Should we give? Of course we should. But don't leave them there. And that's what we're doing. We're leaving them there in the millions and millions and millions. Listen, you may have been born into poverty, but you don't have to stay in poverty. Because let me tell you something. Poverty is not a virtue. And what we don't realize what we're doing is that we're condemning people to a lifetime of poverty, because all we've done is sustain them for another 15 minutes, another 15 hours, another week in the same condition, but we never ever get them out of it because we never teach them how to get out of that situation. That's what I condemn. Now, if you think that's wrong, well, then I guess we have a difference of opinion. And I understand that, of course. But this idea of looking at people and say, oh, look how poor they are, let's give them, a candy bar. Oh, look how poor they are, let's buy them an apple. Oh, look how poor they are, let's buy them a banana. Oh, look how poor they are, let's buy them, some food and give it to them. And then we leave them there. We never ever teach them how to get out of their situation. And you can stay in a situation for so long that after a while, this is what happens. Your mind gets set. This is where I am for the rest of my life. You come to a state of resignation. We cause that resignation. We help to develop that resignation in their lives. We need to get them out of that situation, but in order to get them out of that situation, it's going to cost them absolutely everything. To get them out of that situation is extremely painful. We have to create more pain to get them out of that situation than they already have. But because of our emotions and our sentiments and our feelings, we don't want to cause them any more pain. We want to relieve them of their pain. So we're constantly giving them, pain relief, but we never get them out of their situation. So that's where we have to understand what the difference is between what poverty is. Poverty is the scarcity and the lack of a certain amount of material possessions, which does not help them to provide for their food, clothing, and shelter. Now, economics is the study of scarce resources with alternative uses. So we have two things that are happening simultaneously in their lives, and yet God has a divine plan to get them out of that situation. Now, Jesus said this. He said, we will always have the poor among us, because, one of the things that we fail to do in the life of the church, in the ministry, is that we don't ever teach our people how to give their way out of their situation. We keep them in a situation where they're always depending upon somebody else. I don't want anybody to depend upon me. I want to depend upon God, because God is a sovereign God, and God is the only person that has implemented a divine law of sowing and reaping. He's the only one that can multiply something, okay, and do miracles that we're not capable of doing. So I want you to understand what I'm talking about here. Listen, we have a man outside of our church building who I don't even deal with him anymore. I don't. I realize this is going worldwide. Now, we gave him clothes, we gave him food, we gave him money, we did everything to try to help him get out of his situation. But he doesn't want to get out. All he wants is to spend the rest of his life receiving something from somebody. And what I discovered later on is that he was now engaged in a situation where he was doing drugs. Now, here's somebody who's in a state of destitution. And somehow he's buying what they call nickel bags of cocaine. little nickel bags. And what a nickel bag is basically, it's costing him $25 a bag. He takes 3 bags a day. That's $75 a day. Now, you do the math. He's spending $75 a day on drugs for money that people are giving to him. Okay? And he finds himself now he's in his health condition is worse. Even after his health condition got worsened, and I'm talking to him, he still doesn't want to do anything to get out of his situation. What he believes is that the world owes him something, and he's demanding that the world always pass by him and leave him something so he can continue living the way he wants to live, in a state of existence. And I will not do that. So we don't take him food anymore. We don't do anything for him anymore because he's chosen to stay there. But he's expecting that the world provide for him while he does absolutely nothing. Now, what is the old adage? The old adage is that you can give a man a fish to eat, or you can teach him, or you can teach him to fish so he can eat the rest of his life. Well, the Bible does not teach both of them. This is what the Bible teaches. Okay, you help the poor out, right? But then you teach them to get out of the situation. And so you need to understand that if somebody doesn't want to help themselves and they just want to stay in a position where they're always receiving, and that you are obligated to help them, that they have no obligation whatsoever to help themselves, then my answer to you is no. That is what I condemn. I condemn 2 things. One, the person who never wants help and wants to get out of this situation, but they expect you to provide all of their needs for them. And secondly, what I also condemn is that we leave people there, okay, who want to get out, but we never teach them how to get out of this situation. And really what happens is that we become masters and they become slaves. Now, this is what the missionary movement has done all over the world. You can go to places all over Africa, all over Latin America, all over Asia, and they will do absolutely nothing and expect the Western missionary to come in and pay for absolutely everything. You can go into the church building. You can build a brand new church building. I've seen this in so many different countries I've been to. You build a brand new church building. You equip that church building. You put all the furnishings inside that church building. Okay? A year from now, you go back to that church building and it's filthy, it's dirty, things are broken, the windows are broken, the paint is peeling off the walls, okay? And nobody does anything to maintain it because they're waiting for the next set of missionaries to come and fix it for them. Ladies and gentlemen, that is absolutely wrong. And what you discover is that people really, they're living in relative poverty, but when you show up on the scene, they present to you absolute poverty. I was in the Philippines in this church, and across the street was a beautiful church facility. And so we went into this old church building, and here's what we discovered. That every time a missionary came, the congregation and the pastor would meet in the old church building, which is run down, beaten down, okay? And the missionaries had no idea what that church building was across the street. So one day, during one of our sessions that we were teaching at the break, I went outside and I had a cup of coffee in my hand. I went outside and a man from a local store was walking down the street and he says, "Oh, you're a missionary?" I said, "Yes, I am." And he says, "Do you know these people are lying to you?" And I looked at him and I said, "Excuse me?" And so I said, "What do you mean by that?" And he says, "You see this building across the street?" I go, "Yeah, I'm looking at it. It's a beautiful facility." He goes, "That's theirs." I said, "What do you mean it's theirs?" He goes, "Oh, every time all you missionaries," and this is how he said it, "every time all of you missionaries come, the whole congregation meets over here, and they tell you how poor they are. And you guys just give all kinds of money to them, okay? And then the moment you leave, they go right back to that brand new church building over there." And I was kind of taken back by what he said, and I said, "No, you got to be kidding me." And he said, No, I'm telling you the truth." And so when he told me that, I was just quite taken back by that. So this is during the break. So when I walked back in, and I had everybody in front of me now, and the pastors were sitting in the front row, and I said, "I want to ask you guys a question because I just had a conversation outside." And I said, "I want to know if this is true or not, or perhaps the man was upset, and he's upset at you, but tell me." So the moment I began to relate everything, you could see the state of shock in all their faces, and I knew at that moment that what that man told me outside was true. And I came down from the platform and I confronted the leadership and I said, well, yeah. I said, "Why would you deceive me and lie to me in such a way?" And what was amazing was that somebody in the back yelled out, he says, "Well, we expect you missionaries to pay for everything." I condemn that. That's a deceit. That's quite deceitful. That should never happen, and yet it happens all the time because we never teach people how to get out of poverty. We maintain them inside of poverty.